Hello, welcome to my channel. You'll notice that I have a variety of bikes behind me. This is the first video in a series that I'm going to do called Getting Back into BMX. As older riders, it's kind of a difficult challenge and a lot of people are afraid to try it. So this series is going to be focused towards older riders, but it can apply to anybody that wants to get into BMX. The first thing in this series is going to be what type of bike should you get to get into BMX. So I'll explain the one to my left in a minute here and why that's here, but we're going to start out talking about the 20-inch, right? Then I have my 22 here, and I'll explain the differences and why maybe a 22 might be a better choice for somebody that's older and just getting either back into BMX or into BMX. And then over here, you'll notice this is not a BMX bike. It's a 26-inch dirt jump bike, but I'll talk about that in a second. So let's start over here with the 20-inch. So a 20-inch bike is your traditional wheel size BMX bike. So when I say 20-inch, I'm referring to the size of the wheel, and that includes the tire. So from the ground to the top of the tire, that's how they measure wheel size. 20-inch bike, they're more readily available. They're pretty easy to get. But the thing about getting into BMX is 20-inch bike is a pretty extreme, how do I call it, like choice, because it's going to be the most twitchy and unstable, if that makes any sense. Smaller wheel, tighter geometry, shorter rear end, really steep head angle. Most are 75. In fact, this one is, I believe. This is either 74.5 or 75, but pretty close. And it's going to be the most challenging bike to learn on if you're wanting to learn tricks. Not to persuade you not to make this choice, but it is going to be the most challenging to start out on. And you'll have to be really careful because the front end comes up really easy. Bunny hopping it, things like that are going to be less stable. All that stuff, even turning and stuff is much quicker, things like that. So we're going to move to the 22, and why these are becoming more popular, especially for older riders, is they ride much like a 20-inch bike, but they give you just a little bit more stability, a little bit bigger wheelbase, which means just a tiny bit longer rear end, although this one actually has a pretty short rear end on it. It's going to be longer up front, offering a little bit more stability. So they're harder to get is the problem. So it's harder to get a 22-inch. They're just not as popular or readily available, but they are out there. So this would be kind of what I recommend if you really want to stick with pure BMX and you want the look of a BMX bike, things like that. But it's going to be a little more stable. Balance is going to be better. If you're going to bunny hop or manual, it won't be quite so like twitchy and want to flip out on you and stuff like that, like a 20-inch will be. That makes a big difference on how a bike feels. And the larger wheel, if you know anything about rotational weight, as a wheel is moving, the larger it is, the more stability it'll give your bike. So that's kind of why I have the DJ bike over here. So if we come over here to the 26-inch DJ bike, even though it's not a BMX bike, and in the case of this particular one, I actually have a rigid BMX fork on it. A lot of DJ bikes come with a suspension fork, which is actually fine. Most of the suspension forks on dirt jump bikes are really stiff, or you can pump the air up so they're pretty stiff, and then they're just basically there in case you need them on hard landings. Well, as we get older, our wrists get more fragile or they get sore easier, things like that. But, bigger wheel, more stable, but everything about this is just like a BMX bike. It's got one rear brake, short stem, higher handlebar. It's way more stable than the 22 and definitely more stable than the 20-inch. But it doesn't look like a traditional BMX bike, and people associate DJ bikes with mountain bikes. So that might make people go, oh, I don't really want one of those because it's not a BMX bike. But as an older rider, this might be a decision you do make. These ride pump tracks really well, they jump really well, things like that. They're not going to be as easy to spin 360, 180, you know, things like that, if that's what you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to spin and do kind of the more, you know, BMX type aggressive tricks, then you might want the smaller bike because they are more agile and easier to do that with. But if you're looking to just ride pump tracks and jump and things like that, 26-inch DJ bike might be your thing. And you can find these on BMX websites. I purely order from Albies for my BMX stuff, and they actually have 26-inch BMX bikes. So one of the bikes you'll notice isn't showing up here. I have an SE Bikes Fat Ripper, or not Fat Ripper, sorry, Fat Quad. They do have a Fat Ripper too. But there's a category of BMX bikes called Big BMX, and they're like 26-inch, 27.5, 29-inch BMX bikes. I really, honestly, they're great for cruising around and these wheelie guys and stuff like that. I mean, if that's what you want to do, by all means, get one of those bikes. But if you're actually looking to ride BMX and do the things that BMXers do, I don't recommend those bikes. They're really big and bulky and heavy, especially the SE branded ones. They're not lightweight, they're heavy. All of these bikes, that's like 24 pounds. This is like 26 and a half pounds. This right here is right around 25 pounds. Those SE bikes, my Fat Quad is pushing like 37, 38 pounds, you know, and most of those bikes are heavy. They got pretty big wheels. The geometry isn't really tight and compact to make you have the agility. So I don't recommend those as a way of getting into BMX. If you want to use them to cruise around on, learn wheelies, things like that, great. But if you really want to get into BMX, you got a choice between 20-inch, 22, or if you really want to, 26-inch DJ bike is a really good choice. These are really tightly compact. You can see how short the rear end is. The tire almost touches. You know, they're made to be agile and handle, you know, more BMX type riding things, especially jumping. These are really nice to jump, and they're super stable in the air and going to be a lot safer to learn on. So this is series one, is choosing a bike, and it's really a choice of, do you want to go and try the 20-inch? It's going to be the hardest to learn on. 22, that's what I would recommend if you want to stick with pure BMX. Or really 26-inch DJ bike is also a perfect choice, especially if you do have, like, you know, sore wrists or things like that and you want a suspension fork. Almost all of these bikes come with a suspension fork. It's rare you find one with a rigid fork. I chose a rigid fork one because I wanted it to ride more like my 22 and 20-inch bike. And I have mountain bikes with all the suspension and stuff, and it's like great. So I like that to be fully rigid. So this is the first video in a series of many videos I'm gonna do. The next video I'm gonna do is gonna actually apply what I just talked about of riding this bike versus riding this bike versus riding this bike, and what the feeling is on them. And then my third video is going to start touching on what are the first things you should start learning, regardless of which bike you choose. What should you start learning? Since this is my first video and I want to get this out there right away, the one thing I don't want you to do as an airplane goes overhead, I'll wait till the airplane goes, then I'll cut this out and edit it. Yes, if you haven't noticed, I am not in Boston anymore. Okay, so the one thing I want to point out before you try going out and doing any of this is take it slow. Don't just jump on a bike and think you can start hitting ramps or things like that. Start out with the very basics. So that's what my third video is going to be about. So if you can, wait until I get to my third video and tell you kind of the things you should learn. If you're impatient and just want to get out on a bike, work on popping up the wheel, little bunny hops, things like that. Don't just grab, especially like a 20-inch bike, and go hit the jumps unless you have some prior experience with that. If you're a mountain biker and you go to a BMX bike, even a 26-inch DJ, they feel way different. So take your time to get used to the feel of the bike before you go start hitting jumps and stuff like that. Because one thing I don't want is you to get hurt. Okay, appreciate you supporting my channel. Please like and subscribe. Peace.